The one and only Hank South does an outstanding job covering Crimson Tide recruiting for BOL. Hank, did you have a cookout this weekend, or was that pretty much limited to the greater Tuscaloosa area?
Yeah, no, I wasn't as lucky. My cookout involved more of just sitting at a desk with a computer on Saturday night. So, but I'll get to make up for it come August when it goes dead again.
Now,
pretty wise, at least, I should say.
Now, you're a native Texan, right? Am I correct on that?
That's right.
So is it a cookout or is it a barbecue in Texas? What do they call it?
I can go both. I probably would lean towards barbecue, but, cookout works.
The brisket, right, in Texas, that's where it all starts, absolutely. If you can't do brisket in Texas, you can't really fire up a grill, right?
Right. Yeah, brisket and beef ribs, I should say. Beef ribs are important. Ribs.
Yes, if you're ever in that Austin area, La Barbecue, Franklin's, man, I guess the Salt Lick, isn't it out that way?
Salt Lick, yeah, out in Driftwood, yep.
What's the personal favorite of Hank South, if you had to pick in that area?
In that area, Salt Lick is pretty incredible. There's several. There's Ironworks Barbecue, County Line Barbecue. Even Rudy's. I mean, there's several Rudy's throughout the state of Texas, but that's actually pretty solid barbecue as well. So, that's hard to pick just one with how many there are out there.
Is it the sort of setting at Salt Lick, too, that puts it over the top? That's really unique how they go about their business there, right?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like an all-you-can-eat setting. It's out in the country. I think they have a vineyard on site. So you're kind of away from the city. And kind of get that country feel, and obviously the barbecue is really good as well, so that obviously helps. But it's a pretty unique experience.
So Hank, when Alabama makes that trip out to Austin in just a few years, we're going to have you put together sort of a how-to list for Texas
sure.
and the Austin area. We'll have to get that done with Hank South. I think we got a little time though between now and then to sort of
I'll start working on it.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and get you working on that. The booming Austin metropolitan area. Talking with Hank South, recruiting analyst, and trust me, we will get around to recruiting here in just a second. Hank does an outstanding job there at BamaOnline.com. So in the wake of the most recent Eyabi Anoma news, I got to start out at that position with you, and we'll get around to the cookout again in just a minute. But we've talked so much, Hank, about Alabama's emphasis on edge guys in this latest class, this 2020 class. Knowing what we know now, do you think the staff factored in the possibility of this going down with Anoma, or was it going to be a position where they were going to load up regardless?
I think both. I think outside linebacker was certainly a position they wanted to address this cycle, in the 2020 cycle, with the losses of Terrell Lewis and Anthony Jennings following this upcoming season. So that was an area they were going to go after hard anyway. But if you also factor in kind of what we've seen from Eyabi Anoma so far in his short UA career, he's kind of gone back and forth a few times. I think they kind of had to gear up for that possibility of it eventually happening again. And obviously whenever this all kind of went down, within the program and kind of when they had an idea, we saw June explode with outside guys and edge guys as far as committing and joining the 2020 class. So maybe I think that's fair to say maybe they did kind of do this with anticipation of something that was happening with Eyabi. So, like I said, it was an area they were going to address pretty hard in the 2020 cycle, but I think I wouldn't be surprised to see or to know that, they kind of had this in their mind going about it.
And we talked about this last week, the potential to see more players, more prospects reclassify. Kind of joking about it, but when you look at what Alabama already has committed at the position for 2020, some of these guys might not look too bad on campus this week for the Crimson Tide.
No, I wouldn't disagree with that. I haven't seen all these commits in person, but I've seen guys like Drew Sanders and Quandarius Robinson. Those guys looked like they could come in and contribute right away. And so, I think they might have missed the window as far as being eligible to come in and play and finish high school for 2019. But, that's not maybe, going forward, that's something we see happen a little bit more often.
So what does this mean, Hank, for the outside linebacker spot? And it seems to be a very productive year for that position. Alabama, as we've talked about, with the commitments already from its top-rated prospect in Chris Braswell, same school that produced Eyabi Anoma up there in Baltimore, Maryland. Guys like Drew Sanders, guys like Robinson, Will Anderson. Do you think this with Anoma opens up another spot, maybe even two, for another outside linebacker?
Yeah, I think with Anoma or not, Bama's been really pressing for Philip Webb, the four-star outside linebacker from Georgia, who actually made it back to campus this weekend for an unofficial visit. I think he's kind of been a priority guy regardless of kind of where the position stood at Alabama. And so, I think this opens the door even more for Bama to press for him as they have been. I think the biggest question now, as far as guys beyond Philip Webb, will be what happens with guys like Reggie Grimes, the Alabama legacy, edge talent. That he's kind of more of an athlete, kind of edge talent. He can do a lot of things. He's a pretty raw edge rusher, so he's certainly a guy that would need to get into a program and develop a little bit before he could contribute. Another guy that when we're talking about reclassification, Donnell Harris. He's an outside linebacker edge type out of South Florida that just reclassified to the 2020 class from 2021, where he was rated the number one weak side defensive end in the nation. So, does this kind of push Bama to pursue him a little bit harder, or are they going to start pressing for him at this point? We'll see. But I think the biggest question now is, I think they're still going to take one more outside linebacker. But like you said, now is it two? I think that's the biggest question. And does this kind of factor more? Does this factor guys like Reggie Grimes more so into the equation at this point?
Yeah, you mentioned Reggie Grimes, the legacy prospect. His father, of course, an outstanding defensive lineman for the Crimson Tide in the mid to late 1990s. Does this lead to maybe more of a concerted effort, in your opinion, for Grimes?
I think so. I think it's there's something to be said about getting invited to the Cookout. This event is for priority targets for the Alabama staff. It's guys they're really interested in. Do they all have committable offers? It's tough to say. I think it's guys that they want to be in the mix with. So I still think Bama's right there for him. I have my crystal ball pick on Alabama for Reggie Grimes still. I just haven't been brought to the point of changing it just yet. South Carolina and Tennessee are also in the mix for him, but he's going to come back on campus for the Southern Miss game in September on an official visit, and we're still sitting in July, so it's tough to say that there's not going to be a spot for him at the end, but at the same time, numbers are pretty tight, so it could come down to it.
You mentioned the Cookout. I wanted to ask you, of guys who made their way to Tuscaloosa over the weekend that perhaps were committed elsewhere, which one of those would you say is the most flippable, I guess you could say, from the Alabama perspective, guys that were in town over the weekend?
Yeah, two of them, honestly. Jamil Burroughs, the four-star defensive tackle committed to Georgia, he's visited Tuscaloosa more than he has Athens this year, and he looks like he's just ready to hop ship, but he hasn't decommitted yet or announced anything or flipped at this point. He's a pretty quiet kid, so I don't think it's going to be a big show for him. But I think Bama's on his mind, and I think he prefers Bama at this point to Georgia. We'll see what happens with that when he decides to make any moves. Keyshawn Butte, the four-star receiver committed to LSU, he's gone on record saying it's 50-50 between Alabama and LSU at this point in his recruitment. He was back for the second time this summer on Saturday. He brought his dad and a couple friends along with him. So he's certainly considering Alabama and looks like a guy that they could eventually get on board in this class. I think he's going to take his recruitment a little bit longer into the fall. He's going to officially visit Tuscaloosa again for the LSU game. If LSU doesn't really perform on the field this fall, I think that certainly helps Alabama's case. But I think as it stands right now, Alabama's in pretty good shape for him as well. So two guys that were committed elsewhere that Bama really impressed and continues to be in pretty good standing for, in my opinion.
Talking with Hank South, recruiting analyst for BamaOnline.com on Southern Fried Sports, presented by Peterbrook Chocolatier. Now, Butte, the wide receiver commitment to LSU, could he possibly be tied to Dazalen Worsham, the one-time commitment to Alabama from Hewitt-Trussville High School over in the Birmingham area, decommitted from Alabama here not too long ago from that wide receiver position. Could those be sort of connected, or do you think perhaps there could still be room for Worsham to jump back into the class at some point in the future? Because, as you noted on the BOL roundtable over the weekend, Worsham was back in Tuscaloosa for the Cookout.
Yeah, and I think it's a tricky situation just because Bama has 3 receivers committed, but all 3 of those guys are taking visits elsewhere. We've seen Trajan Holden on about every Pac-12 campus throughout the last few months. Javon Baker has been taking visits elsewhere, and Tyu Jones-Bell has been taking visits elsewhere. So you have to still recruit the position hard and leave the possibility open of letting a guy like Dazalen Worsham rejoin the class, because like we've noted on BOL, he wasn't pushed out of the class. He went on that Miami official visit and and had that visit high going, being in South Beach, and changed his mind. And, obviously I think, talking to people, and Tim Watts has reported on this a lot over on BOL, is that it seems like he's regretted that decision and is looking to kind of potentially get back in Bama's class if he can. I don't think that's going to be anything we see resolved here anytime soon. Maybe Dazalen Worsham goes out and has a great senior season and kind of forces his way back in to the class, just that route. But I think Dazalen Worsham, Keyshawn Boutte was a priority prior to Dazalen Worsham backing out of the class. So I don't think it's one of those guys. It's either of those guys for one spot. I think they were ready to take Boutte regardless with Worsham on board. So it's going to be a situation we see play out in the fall. Bama's going to continue recruiting receivers because they kind of have to with their receivers taking visits elsewhere and it being such a priority position in the 2020 class.
Hank, because of the Anoma situation, we've obviously been heavy on the outside linebacker position here on the program today, but still some things to sort out at the inside linebacker spots as well, right? And perhaps some good news coming from a prospect at that position out west.
Yeah, there's 3 inside linebackers Bama's going after, and I think it's pretty safe to say for one spot. That's obviously, there's no absolutes in any of this, but Justin Flo, Jordan Banks, and Noah Sewell are kind of the 3 main inside linebacker targets. Noah Sewell, the latter, he actually put out his top 8 over the weekend with Alabama in it. So he's going to be a guy. We caught up with him at the opening. I think it's more of an Oregon, Texas A&M, Georgia battle for him. Obviously, his older brother Panay was a big Bama target a few cycles ago and ended up at Oregon. So that's kind of the perceived favorite for Noah Sewell to end up at. But he has strong ties to Alabama. I think the Tosh Lupoi situation maybe kind of hurt Bama there as far as, his connection to Bama. But the family has a lot of respect for Nick Saban, and they're getting to know the new staff on board there as well. So he'll be a guy we're watching. But, Justin Flo is another big one, number 1 inside linebacker in the nation. And then Jordan Banks, who's another California guy that actually has Bama atop his list that's being recruited as an inside linebacker. So 3 guys, 3 interesting recruitments that we'll monitor throughout the fall. Yeah,
it gets overlooked, but still very much a need at those inside linebacker positions as well. Now, from the 2021 perspective, I understand some critical early targets that were on campus or have been on campus of late. Give us 1 or 2 of those guys that Alabama may have made some really nice inroads with here, or continue to make those inroads with in the last few days.
Yeah, I think the biggest one as far as coming out of the weekend on Saturday was Colin Montgomery, the 3-star offensive lineman from Houston. I don't think he's going to be a 3-star for much longer. If you look at his, everything he's done so far in his high school career, and then he has almost 24 Power 5 offers to his name. I think he's going to be a guy that has an upward trajectory, but he picked up an offer from Nick Saban on Saturday during his visit. And he actually said Bama was his leader coming off the trip. So I think they kind of made the most headway with him as far as the 2021 class. But, they're picking up some momentum there. Obviously, you got Drake May and Latrell McCutcheon on board. It's shaping up to be another strong year in 2021.
So there you go, Hank South. Give him a follow on Twitter at Hank South 247 if you haven't already. I mean, what's your problem? Go ahead and do that right now. And follow the great coverage by Hank South. Tim Watts, Tim South. I've morphed them. They're such a machine in how they work together. I went ahead and put them together. But Tim Watts, Hank South do an outstanding job there at BamaOnline.com.